It is still dark, not the soft dark of early morning, when the sky begins to bruise purple at the horizon, and birds start to consider the possibility of dawn. This is the hard dark, the black hour before any of that. The hour when the city of Jerusalem is mostly silent, and the streets are empty, and the air smells like cold stone. A woman is walking. She is carrying spices, myrrh and aloes, wrapped carefully, chosen to do one specific job. She is not walking quickly. She is walking the way people walk when they have accepted something terrible, when grief has moved past its loud stage and settled into the quiet work of getting through the next hour. Her name is Mary. She is from a town called Magdala, on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, and she is walking toward a tomb because she loved a man who is dead, and this is all she has left to give him. She is not expecting anything. That is the thing you need to understand about that morning. Not one person walking toward that tomb, not Mary, not the other women with her, not Peter, not John, was walking toward it expecting what they were about to find. They had heard him say it. 3 times, in plain language, Jesus had told his disciples that he would be killed and rise on the 3rd day, and not one of them believed it enough to show up at the tomb early and wait it. Mary came to anoint a corpse. That is all. And then the ground shakes. There is a detail in that first morning, a small detail, the kind that gets skipped over in Sunday sermons because there are bigger things to say. But it has bothered careful readers of the Gospel of John for 2,000 years. And nobody has ever fully explained it. In the tomb, after the body of Jesus is gone, there are grave clothes still lying there, the long linen strips that would have been wound around his body. They are still there, lying flat, like the shape of something that used to be inside them. And separate from the body wrappings, in a place by itself, is the face cloth. It is folded, not thrown aside, not crumpled, not tossed in a corner the way you might expect if a body had been stolen, or if someone had torn their way out in a panic. It is folded, deliberately, carefully, placed apart from the rest. No one has ever fully explained why it was folded. We will come back to it, but first, you need to understand what this story is not. This is not a story about Easter eggs. This is not a story about spring equinoxes, or fertility symbols, or ancient festivals that got absorbed into Christian calendars. This is not a story about a holiday that got commercialized, or a tradition your grandmother kept, or the Sunday you dressed up and went to church and sang the songs and had ham afterward. This is a story about a body, a real body, belonging to a real man, who was executed under a real Roman governor named Pontius Pilate, in a real city, in a real year, and who, 3 days later, was not in the place where they put him. This is a story about what the Bible actually says happened, not what the culture says. Not what the traditions say, what the text says, and the text, if you read it carefully, is far stranger, far more specific, and far more world-shattering than anything Easter morning has ever managed to contain. Mary arrives at the tomb, and the stone is gone. Matthew tells us there was an earthquake. An angel came down from heaven, rolled away the stone, and sat on it, and the guards who had been posted there to prevent exactly this kind of thing fell down like dead men. By the time Mary arrives, the guards are gone. The stone is gone, and there is a gap in the rock face where a sealed entrance used to be. She does not go inside. Not yet. She turns around, and she runs. She runs back through the dark streets of Jerusalem, back to where Peter and John are staying, and she is out of breath and probably barely coherent when she says, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Notice what she assumes. Grave robbers. She assumes grave robbers, not resurrection, not miracle. Grave robbers, even now. Even standing at an empty tomb, on the morning the angels have already said he is risen. She assumes the worst thing she can imagine, because the best thing she can imagine is not on her list of options. You have done this. You know this feeling. When something has broken so completely that hope doesn't even occur to you as a category anymore. When you are so far down in the grief that you can only think in terms of what else could go wrong, not what might go right. Mary is there, in that place, and she runs. Here's what most people miss about what happens next. 2 men start running toward the tomb. Peter, the fisherman from Bethsaida, the one who walked on water and then sank, the one who swore he would never deny Jesus, and then did it 3 times before the rooster called dawn. Peter is running. And John, the youngest of the disciples, the one who stood at the foot of the cross when almost all the others had fled. John is running too, and John is faster. This is not a detail Luke invented. This is not theological symbolism. This is the kind of specific, irrelevant, embarrassingly human detail that ends up in stories because it actually happened. John outruns Peter. He arrives at the tomb first. He bends down and looks through the opening, and he sees the linen cloths lying there. And he does not go in. He waits, and then Peter arrives, out of breath, and does exactly what you would expect Peter to do. He goes straight in. No hesitation. He sees the linen wrappings lying flat, and he sees the face cloth, the cloth that had been wrapped around the head of Jesus, lying separately. In a place by itself, folded, John follows him in. And the gospel says something strange and precise. He saw and believed, not he saw the angels. There are no angels mentioned in this moment. Not he saw Jesus. Jesus is not there. He saw grave clothes, lying in a pattern that made no sense if a body had been stolen, lying in a pattern that made no sense if a body had decomposed, lying in a pattern that could only make sense if... And something shifted in him. He saw and believed. But Peter doesn't quite get there yet. Luke tells us Peter went away wondering to himself what had happened. Peter is the kind of man who needs to touch things, who needs to argue things through, who needs more data. He will get it. But not this morning. They leave. Both of them, and Mary stays. This is where the Gospel of John slows all the way down. Everything else in these chapters moves fast. Running earthquakes, angels, appearances. But here, at the tomb, with Mary alone, John takes his time. She is weeping. Standing outside the tomb, she is weeping. And at some point, she bends down and looks into the tomb herself. And she sees two angels in white, sitting where the body of Jesus had been, one at the head and one at the feet. They ask her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she says to two angels sitting in an empty tomb, with complete simplicity, "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." She has answered two angels as if they were strangers on the street. She is so deep in her grief, she doesn't even register what she is looking at. She turns around, and there is a man standing there. She thinks he is the gardener. That is what the text says. She thinks the man standing behind her in the pre-dawn light is the groundskeeper of the garden where the tomb was built, and she says to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Just let that sentence sit with you for a moment. She is offering to carry a dead body. She doesn't care how heavy it is. She doesn't care what the logistics are. She just wants to find him. And then the man says one word. Mary, that is all. Her name. One word. In the voice she recognized better than any other voice in the world. The voice that had cast 7 demons out of her. The voice that had called her by name before. The voice that she had watched go silent on a cross and thought she would never hear again. She turns. She says one word back, in Aramaic, her native tongue, the language of her childhood, Rabboni. Teacher, stay with me. Because here is the thing about Mary Magdalene that most people don't know. She was not a respectable witness. She was a woman, which in first-century Jewish and Roman legal culture meant her testimony was not admissible in court. She was a woman with a history. 7 demons, which is the New Testament's way of describing a life that had been broken at a level most people can't imagine. She was the last person you would choose if you were inventing a resurrection story and wanted people to believe it, and she is the first person Jesus appears to. The first witness to the risen Christ is a woman with a disreputable past in a culture that wouldn't believe her. That is not an accident. That is a statement. We are only at the first morning. Easter Sunday, hour 1. An empty tomb, a folded cloth, 1 woman who ran away and came back, and 2 disciples who left more confused than when they arrived. And already the story has given us things that don't fit any theory except one. If you're finding this worthwhile, if you're the kind of person who wants to know what the Bible actually says, not just what everyone assumes it says, go ahead and subscribe. There are more videos on this channel that go this deep into the text, and drop a comment before you keep watching. What detail so far has surprised you most? Was it the folded cloth, Mary hearing her name, or something else? Tell me below, because we are not done. Not even close. We have not yet talked about the 2 men walking 7 miles on a broken Sunday afternoon, who didn't recognize the person walking beside them. We have not talked about the disciple who refused to believe. and the week he spent in that refusal, and what happened when Jesus came back specifically for him. And we have not yet talked about a letter written within a few years of the crucifixion by a man who used to execute Christians for a living, which contains the single most important document in the history of the resurrection claim. Keep watching. It is the same Sunday. The afternoon of Resurrection Sunday, two men are walking west out of Jerusalem, on the road to a village called Emmaus. The road is about 7 miles. At a pace of 3 miles an hour, you're looking at just over 2 hours of walking, which means 2 hours of talking, which means 2 hours of the conversation these men are having, which is, as Luke describes it, a conversation about everything that had happened. One of the men is named Cleopas. Luke names him specifically. The other man is unnamed, possibly Cleopas's wife. Some scholars suggest, though the text doesn't say. They are not disciples in the inner circle. They are followers, believers, or people who had been believers before Friday happened, and they are devastated. Luke says their faces were downcast. This is the face of a specific kind of grief, not the fresh grief of the moment, but the hollowed-out grief of the day after, when the adrenaline is gone and what's left is just the absence. They had believed Jesus was the one who was going to redeem Israel. They had believed something enormous was about to happen, and then he died on a cross like a criminal. And 3 days later, some of the women in their group were saying the tomb was empty, but nobody had seen him. And then a stranger joins them on the road. The stranger asks what they're talking about. And Cleopas stops walking. Luke notes this, that they stood still, looking downcast, and says to this stranger, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" It is, in retrospect, one of the most spectacular things anyone has ever said. The stranger says, "What things?" And here is where the gospel slows down and gives you something remarkable. This stranger, whom you already know is Jesus, because Luke told you at the beginning of the scene, takes these two heartbroken people on a walk through the entire Hebrew Bible. From Moses to the prophets, systematically, he explains every passage of Scripture that pointed to what the Messiah would have to suffer and then enter his glory. 2 hours of walking. 2 hours of Scripture. And they don't recognize him. This is one of the details that bothers people, and you should let it bother you, because it's meant to. The resurrected body of Jesus is clearly physical. He walks, he talks, he will eat in a moment. But he is also different. Mary didn't recognize him at first. These two don't recognize him for 2 hours. The disciples on the shore of Galilee, in another appearance, don't recognize him either, until the moment he tells them to cast their net on the right side of the boat. The resurrection body is real, and it is also somehow more. They get to Emmaus. The stranger acts as if he is going further, and they urge him, strongly. Luke says they urge him, "Stay with us. It is getting late. Don't go." He stays. They sit down for the evening meal. He takes bread. He blesses it. He breaks it and gives it to them. And their eyes are opened, not gradually, instantly. One moment they don't know him, the next they do. And in the moment they recognize him, he vanishes, and Cleopas turns to his companion and says something that has been echoing for 2,000 years. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the Scriptures to us? They had felt it. The whole walk, they had felt something in their chests that they couldn't name, and now they know what it was. And they get up. Even though it is evening, even though the road back to Jerusalem is 7 miles, even though they have just walked those 7 miles in the other direction. And they go straight back, but it gets stranger, because while Cleopas and his companion are making their way back to Jerusalem, something is happening in the locked room where the 11 remaining disciples are gathered. The doors are shut. John's Gospel specifies this, locked for fear of the Jewish authorities. And Jesus appears, not through the door, not after someone opens the door. He is just there. He shows them his hands and his side. He breathes on them. He says, "Peace be with you." And then he says something that has defined the mission of the church for 2,000 years. "As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." But one of them isn't there, Thomas, called Didymus, which means the twin in both Greek and Aramaic, because he was a twin, because the Bible is specific about real people. Thomas isn't in the room. And when the others tell him what happened, He says the thing he will be remembered for forever. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. Not, I'm not sure. Not, that seems unlikely. I will not believe. 8 days of that. 8 days of Thomas sitting with his doubt, surrounded by people who had seen something he hadn't, holding the line on his refusal. And here is what most people miss about Thomas. Jesus doesn't punish him for it. 1 week later, same locked room, the disciples are gathered again. And Thomas is with them this time. And Jesus comes again, through the locked door, out of nowhere, and he looks at Thomas, and he says, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." He came back, specifically. For the one who doubted, the text doesn't say whether Thomas actually touched the wounds or whether the sight alone was enough. What the text says is what Thomas said. He looked at the man in front of him and said 7 words that are the highest confession of faith in the entire Gospel of John: "My Lord and my God." Not teacher, not prophet, not miracle worker, my Lord and my God. Now here is the part nobody tells you. Everything we have covered. The empty tomb, the folded cloth, Mary in the garden, the road to Emmaus, Thomas and the wounds. All of this comes from the 4 Gospels, written by followers of Jesus in the decades after the events. And for 2,000 years, skeptics have argued that this is exactly the problem. People who loved him wrote the story. Of course, they said he rose from the dead, but there is a document that changes everything about that argument. It is a letter, written by a man named Saul of Tarsus, who would later be called Paul, to a group of Christians living in the city of Corinth, in Greece. The letter is dated to around 55 AD. But inside the letter, Paul quotes something older, a creed, a short, structured statement of belief that scholars, including historians who do not believe in the resurrection, including Bart Ehrman, who is perhaps the most prominent secular New Testament scholar in the world, scholars agree was circulating within a very short time of the crucifixion itself. How short? Paul met with Peter and James in Jerusalem, probably around 35 or 36 AD, within 3 to 5 years of the crucifixion. He received this creed from them, which means the creed existed before Paul wrote it down. The statement you are about to hear is not a legend that grew over centuries. It is not a story that evolved as it passed from person to person. It is a creed that was being recited in Christian communities within what may be 18 months. Iten mooks of the events it describes. Here is what it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and he was buried, and he was raised on the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. And he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers and sisters at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. Paul is essentially writing a legal brief. He is not saying trust the story. He is saying 500 people saw him. Most of them are still alive. Go ask them. This is not the kind of claim you make if you're inventing something. If you invent something, you don't point people toward 500 living witnesses who could contradict you. You only do this if you believe, absolutely believe, that every one of those people will confirm the same thing you're saying. Pay attention to this. The Greek word Paul uses for resurrection, anastasis, means to stand up again, not to become a spirit, not to live on in memory, to stand up, in a body, the same body transformed, but real, physical, present. When Paul argues for the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15, he argues for it in terms of somoma, the Greek word for body. He goes out of his way to say, this is a bodily resurrection. Whatever the resurrection body is, it is not less physical than what you have now. It is more. This matters because every other religion in the ancient world had categories for spiritual afterlife. The Greeks believed in souls continuing after death. The Egyptians built entire burial systems around it. Judaism itself had traditions about the soul continuing. The early Christians had simply meant, Jesus lives on spiritually, or Jesus is alive in our hearts, or the Spirit of Jesus continues through us. Nobody would have crucified them for saying it. You don't die for a metaphor. They died. Peter crucified upside down, Paul beheaded in Rome, James stoned in Jerusalem, because they were claiming something that the Roman Empire and the Jewish authorities found dangerous. Not a memory, not a symbol, a body, an actual, physical, resurrected body. A man who had been publicly executed, certified dead by Roman soldiers whose job it was to make sure, laid in a sealed tomb with a guard posted outside. And 3 days later, gone. And here is where we come back to the folded cloth. In first-century Jewish culture, there was a custom understood by every servant, every household worker, every person who had served at a master's table. When a master sat down to eat and finished his meal, if he crumpled his napkin and dropped it on the table, it meant he was done. The meal was over. You could clear the table, but if he folded his napkin, carefully, deliberately, and set it aside, it meant something else entirely. It meant, I am coming back. Don't touch anything. I am not finished. The folded face cloth in the tomb of Jesus was not a meaningless detail. It was not the kind of thing that happens by accident. Somebody folded it. And whoever folded it, whatever that act meant in the moment. The people who first read John's Gospel, the people for whom the Jewish table custom was not a historical footnote, but living common knowledge, they would have caught it. He is not here. The tomb is empty. But the napkin is folded. He is coming back. And Thomas, who touched the wounds, and Mary, who heard her name, and Cleopas, whose heart burned on the road. They spent the rest of their lives betting everything on it, not as a metaphor, not as a tradition, as a fact. The most spectacular claim in human history is not that a man was kind, or that a teacher was wise, or that a prophet spoke truth. Those are things that happen and leave beautiful marks on the world. The most spectacular claim in human history is that a man died, and the universe itself refused to let him stay dead. That is what the Bible says about Easter. So let's end here with 3 things. The first is this. The Bible describes a physical resurrection, not a metaphor, not a vision, not a spiritual experience that the disciples reframed as bodily. Jesus ate food. He was touched. He bore wounds that were still visible. The Greek word for what happened is anastasis, standing up again. The earliest creed we have, written within years of the event, was treated by the people who wrote it as a legal claim, not a theological poem. You can disagree with it, you can reject it, but you should at least know what the claim actually is before you do. The second is this. The first person chosen to witness the risen Christ was a woman with a broken past in a culture that would not legally accept her testimony. Mary Magdalene was not a credible witness by first-century standards. She was not influential. She was not powerful. She was someone Jesus had already rescued once from 7 demons, from whatever that life had been. And he chose her, specifically, to be the first to carry the news that he was alive. If this story were invented, she would not be in it. The fact that she is in it, that she is first, is either a profound mistake by people trying to make their story believable, or it is the signature of something that actually happened the way only God would do it. Not the way power works, the way grace works. And the third thing, the one I want you to carry out of this video, is the folded cloth. In a borrowed tomb, in a garden outside Jerusalem, on the 3rd morning after the worst Friday in history, somebody folded a cloth, deliberately, carefully, and set it aside. And in the culture where that cloth was folded, in the tradition where that gesture had a meaning, it meant one thing: I am coming back. This is not a story about a holiday. This is not a story about a Sunday tradition or a season or a date on a calendar. This is a story about a man who, in the act of leaving, left a message. Not in thunder, not in a letter, not in a vision, in a folded piece of cloth in an empty tomb. He is not here. He said he would return, and the cloth is still folded. Now, I want to know one thing from you. Which moment in this video stopped you? Was it the folded cloth and what it meant? Was it Mary hearing her name in the garden? Was it Thomas? 8 days of doubt, and Jesus coming back specifically for him? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and if you found something here worth knowing, share it with someone who needs to hear it before next Easter. He is risen.